Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Love Meets Literature. We are somehow already on episode 3. It feels like we've been doing this forever. But I am your host, Rachel. You can find me on Instagram at Paperbacks and Sketchbooks.
And I am your other host, Joe. You can find us at Love Meets Literature.
Yes, so if you feel so inclined, you can follow us on Instagram so you can get show updates and book reviews and just random thoughts while we're not talking to you right now. And you can also follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts now. Yes, so if you want to support our little podcast, please go ahead and give us a follow. It helps get Love Meets Literature out there.
Oh, and YouTube, right?
Yes, we are also on YouTube Music. We're on a whole slew of podcasting sites now, and you can find links to those in our Instagram bio. So, episode 3. Today, we are going to be talking about some books that we have on our TBRs, which is our to-be-read shelves. And I specifically chose books that I have on my bookshelves because, like we mentioned a few episodes ago, I have so many books on my bookshelves and I need to start reading them. So I'm bringing a few books from my actual shelves today.
I have also brought 2 books from the actual shelf, and then one is yet to be acquired.
Hopefully this actually gives us motivation to read these books that we actually own, because I know I have a horrible habit of just continuously checking out library books and not actually reading books that I own.
But you're supporting the library.
I am supporting the library, but I need to support myself.
That's true. Yes, you do have a huge amount of books that need to be read still.
We'll get there one of these days. But I've been curious because I know you're a little bit newer to compiling a TBR list and finding books to read and all of that. But where have you been going to find books that you want to read?
My main source has been either simply browsing Goodreads or sometimes Amazon. I will use Reddit, actually. That is where I found the Old Chrome box set that I read, and also one of the books I'm going to talk about today that's on my TBR.
That's interesting. I wouldn't think of Reddit as a place that gives book recommendations.
I mean, not really. You have to know where to look, because like I follow the r/books and r/fantasy, and they'll usually do some form of book recommendation thread or something like that, like about once every week, maybe once every month or something like that. And so you can usually get a pretty good list of things to put onto your TBR. What about you? Where do you find your books?
A lot of places. I am a loyal Kindle Unlimited subscriber, so I find a lot of my books on Kindle Unlimited, which Kindle Unlimited, if you are unfamiliar, it is a source that Amazon has for Kindle owners, or even if you don't own a Kindle, you can still download the app, and you can basically pay a dollar amount per month and read all these books they have in their catalog, basically like for free. And I use air quotes because it's really not free because you're paying per month. It's basically just like a book subscription service, Kindle Unlimited. I really enjoy it. There's a lot of different things that you wouldn't find other places because a lot of independent authors publish their books through Kindle publishing. So that's a place where I find a lot of my books that are on my TBR. I also browse the new shelf at the library every time I go in. Like, I used to just go up to the front desk and get my holds and leave. But now I have the habit of going up the stairs, because upstairs at our library is the adult section, and I go immediately to the new shelf, new books that the library has acquired. And I usually end up picking at least one in addition to the hold that I'm there to pick up. So my TBR builds from that. And then Bookstagram is a big one. I'm big on the Bookstagram. I do find myself going and opening my Storygraph app and adding all these books that I see on Instagram that I want to read. And then Goodreads. Goodreads, again, it's another Amazon-owned service that you basically just follow people and see what they're reading and get book recommendations and track your reading progress. I get a lot of book recommendations off of different lists that the Goodreads staff compiles. They'll compile best fantasy books of 2024 or best romance books of 2024. I find myself perusing those every so often when I'm bored. So with all these sources, my TBR is pretty hefty. It's reaching about 300 if it's not already more than that. I don't have an exact number because unfortunately my lists are not the same everywhere. So I have Storygraph and I have Goodreads, right?
Right.
They are two different apps to track your books. I never remember to update both of those apps when I add a book to my TBR. So I don't really know how accurate my TBR count is, but I'm guessing it's in the 300 range.
You've got 200 here, 100 there, 100 on your shelves.
Yeah, it's a big old mess, and it's just not a mess that I feel like cleaning up anytime soon.
You could just read them. That cleans it up, right?
It does, because as I read, I track it, and then both apps mark it as read. So
that works. For reference, I have 25 books on my TBR, I think. So you're, what is that, 6 times my amount or something like that?
Yeah, I don't do math, but that seems about right. Oh man, I wish I could go back to the day where I only had 25 books on my TBR, but that was back when I was in high school. So
yeah, I'm trying to grow mine because I'm paying more attention. Because my big problem is people will recommend a book or something, and then I'm like, oh, that sounds nice, or oh, I should read that. But then I never go back and actually update some form of tracker to remind myself.
Yeah, you just got to get in the habit of doing that. Well, we are going to be doing a lot of book chatting this episode. So before we jump into that, I just wanted to kind of do something fun and get to know what you are currently obsessed with this week. Even though we live together, we don't do a lot of talking during the week because, we both have our respective jobs. And then after work, I usually sit and I read for hours on end, and I really have no idea what you are doing after work at all. So tell me, what are you doing? What are you obsessing over?
This week, I have been obsessing over a video game, which is not very shocking if you know me. I play a lot of them. But more specifically, there's a video game called Slay the Spire. It is a deck builder roguelite game, and essentially you play the cards, build your deck, ascend up the spire, as the name says, and it's just really fun. Something about it, it's sort of the original deck builder of the genre. It's made by a studio called Megacrit, and they're actually releasing, or they just announced, I should say, Slay the Spire 2, so ever since they did that, I've kind of gone back to play it some more, and it's just re-brought up all the love that I had for it when it originally came out. So I've been playing it nonstop, and it's extremely fun.
I do not know any of what you just said.
Those who know will be like, oh, that's such a good game, or that's so much fun. And if you have any interest in, it's not like a competitive action game. It's very slow-paced. You can take it one step at a time, however you want to. And it's on literally every platform.
I can't remember the last video game that I played. It was probably Animal Crossing. Well, we have been playing a lot of Mario Party on the weekends.
That's true.
I guess the last video game I played was Mario Party. I did go through a big Mario Kart phase.
That's true. We should also play Overcooked again. That's a fun game.
Overcooked. Okay, if you are familiar with Overcooked, you will understand the frustration once you hit the really super hard levels, because we will literally sit there screaming at the TV and screaming at each other, basically, because it's we're both working in a kitchen together, and I'm like, oh geez, I could never ever work in a kitchen setting with you ever in real life, because it's just chaos.
In my /our defense, though, normal kitchens don't just spontaneously light on fire and teleport into other dimensions and things like that. So
that is so true.
I think we'd be all right.
Yeah, Overcooked is fun that way because they have portals that will take you to other dimensions. Sometimes the floor just falls out from under you.
Oh, yes. So annoying.
Lava will just pour into your kitchen. You could even get hit by a car as you're crossing the street.
Oh, I forgot about that level.
I've done that a lot. I've also caught on fire a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. We've burned down a mini kitchen.
But that is a fun game. We do need to play that again.
What about you? What are you obsessed with this week?
I'm obsessed with my hammock, if that counts as a valid obsession.
I think so.
All I want to do is lay in my hammock. Now, how many times have I actually laid in my hammock this week? Once. But that's only because it's been windy outside and kind of rainy and humid and gross. Plus, the people that live downstairs are always outside and they're talking and it's annoying. When I'm in the hammock, I want peace, peacefulness, quiet. So I can sit and read an entire book. So I'd say that's my obsession, is my hammock. But okay, so that's good. You're obsessed with video games. I'm obsessed with virtually nothing, but that's okay. We'll circle back and see if I'm obsessed with anything next week. I am very excited to learn about what's on your TBR. I feel like we're still trying to figure out what you enjoy reading. I feel like you're still trying to figure out what you enjoy reading, which is perfectly fine. It took me years to figure out what I liked to read. Even last year, at the beginning of the year, I feel like I was giving so many books like 2 and 3 stars because I just wasn't enjoying them. And that was just because I didn't know what I liked to read. And now that I know what genres I like and what I like in a book, I've found myself rating books higher. I give more 4 and 5 stars out.
I definitely agree that I'm still working on finding out exactly what I like to read. There's a lot of the times where I think I'm going to like something, or I really believe I'm going to like a series or maybe an author, and then it turns out that I don't, and I kind of peter out. But it's been fun in the learning process, I would say, getting exposed to a lot of different things.
Well, that's good. So I guess, what is one of the books on your TBR that you're going to talk about today?
The first book that I have lined up is called A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. Oh, nope, that's not his name.
Yes, we've just discovered that Joe Abercrombie is there's no M in there. It's not AMB, it's just AB.
Yeah, ABER Crombie.
Like, I literally, like, you mentioned that and I was like, oh, there's no way. I had to look and see if that was right, and it was. Like, we both had his name wrong forever.
I have said it on previous episodes, completely incorrect name.
Well, we have learned, Joe Abercrombie, we apologize. We won't get your name wrong again.
I'll try my best. This is the next, what I believe is also a trilogy. So I read the first one, which was called the First Law Trilogy, and I talked about that on the last episode. But the synopsis, or summary, I should say, for this book is: the chimneys of industry rise over Adua, and the world seethes with new opportunities. But old scores run deep as ever. On the blood-soaked borders of England, Leo Don Brock struggles to win fame on the battlefield and defeat the marauding armies of Stour Nightfall. He hopes for help from the crown, but King Jezel's son, the freckless Prince Orso, is the man who specializes in disappointments. Savine Don Glocta, socialite, investor, and daughter of the most feared man in the Union, plans to claw her way to the top of the slag heap of society by any means necessary. But the slums boil over with a rage that all the money in the world cannot control. The age of the machine dawns, but the age of magic refuses to die. With the help of the mad hill woman, Reich struggles to control the blessing or the curse of the long eye. Glimpsing the future is one thing, but with the guiding hand of the first of the magi still pulling the strings, changing it will be quite another.
Interesting. So why this one specifically? Why is it on your TBR?
This is sort of the pinnacle of what I like about high fantasy. You just heard a bunch of crazy words and crazy things.
I did,
mixed together, and I love it. This is kind of exactly what I look for in a book. And not to mention that since this is the successor, so to speak, of the First Law Trilogy, I'm very excited to read it. A lot of these names that I dropped sound probably like gibberish, but if you've read the First Law Trilogy, these are all direct correlations to other people from those books. So it's very exciting to see sort of the next step. And what I had mentioned previously was that I was quite disappointed with the ending. So this is kind of the next step. Like there's a new ending being written with these books. So I'm very excited about it.
Is this the book that I bought you?
Yes, this is the book that you bought me.
I remember when I was in Barnes & Noble, I glanced at the back of the book, but all these names, I looked at it and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm not even going to bother to read the synopsis because I know he's read books by this author. So we're just going to go with it.
It's, if you were to read this as well, again, it's gibberish without sort of the understanding from the first book.
Well, I have a book on my TBR that is not gibberish. No fantasy here, even though I do read fantasy, but I'm not bringing any fantasy books today. One book on my TBR is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. You may recognize the name because I have read 2 other Abby Jimenez books that I absolutely raved about. So this one is technically book 3 of the Part of Your World series, but it can be read as a standalone. I recommend reading them in order because they can have spoilers for previous books. So Part of Your World, Yours Truly, and then this one, Just for the Summer, they all have interconnecting characters. They're all in the same world. So it is possible, like if you were to read Just for the Summer before you read Yours Truly, you're going to get things from Yours Truly spoiled in Just for the Summer. So even though they are technically standalone books and they each have their own story and you don't need to know the previous information, I still recommend reading them in order, which would be Part of Your World, Yours Truly, and then Just for the Summer. So this one is a romantic comedy, obviously. We love a good rom-com over here. So Justin has a curse, and thanks to a Reddit thread, it's now all over the internet. Every woman he dates goes on to find their soulmate the second they break up. But when a woman slides into his DMs with the same problem, they come up with a plan. They'll date each other and break up. Their curses will cancel each other's out, and they'll both go on to find the love of their lives. It's a bonkers idea, and it just might work. But Emma hadn't planned that her next assignment as a traveling nurse would be in Minnesota. But she and her best friend agree that dating Justin is too good of an opportunity to pass up, especially when they get to rent an adorable cottage on a private island on Lake Minnetonka. It's supposed to be a quick fling, just for the summer. But when Emma's toxic mother shows up and Justin has to assume guardianship of his 3 siblings, they're suddenly navigating a lot more than they expected, including catching real feelings for each other. What if this time fate has actually brought the perfect pair together? So this is obviously on my TBR because I read both Yours Truly and Part of Your World. So obviously I need to read the 3rd book. And what I really love about Abby Jimenez's books is that even though they are romantic comedies, they do throw in serious real life topics. Like if you noticed in the synopsis, it mentioned that Emma has a toxic mom. So we're probably going to get the toxic parent talk in there. And Justin has to assume guardianship of his 3 siblings. So we're probably going to get something about that in there as well. And those are both heavy topics. You do kind of have to be in a good headspace to read her books. But at the same time, they're like so lighthearted that it's like, it's still fun, even though it's like sad.
Easy to digest, sort of.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not like she's bringing like light to these heavy topics. Like she always treats everything with such sensitivity and care. Like I love that about her.
Well, I guess that's good.
She just does a good job with it, okay? That's like all I can really say. It's hard to describe how an author takes on hard subjects.
Yeah, I can't. I wouldn't know how to explain that either.
Just know that she's really good at it and she's really good with the banter. So I'm excited to see how Emma and Justin interact with each other. I need to read this book. I was planning on reading it a couple of weeks ago, but then my stupid order was shipped off to Texas after it was already here in our city. So it took a vacation to Texas and then I wasn't in the mood to read it anymore when it came in. So now we're just waiting until I'm in the mood for it again.
I didn't realize that was this book.
Yeah, it's this book. And I was very, very upset about it.
Yeah, you were. Now I'm curious, this mentions that Justin has a curse. Are her other books in that similar vein?
I mean, all of her main characters have some sort of problem that they are looking to solve, and it's usually, I mean, it's not always like something as that seems like as silly as a curse. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's usually more of a realistic problem. But I mean, it seems like Justin might be one of those chronically online people just from this synopsis. So maybe it'll have like a play on that.
Unfortunately, if you use Reddit, you might be chronically online. Speaking as somebody who uses Reddit.
Yeah, are you chronically online?
Maybe a little bit too much.
Well, what's up next on your TBR?
The next one that I have is The Cuckoo's Calling by Robert Galbraith, who I found out upon looking up the summary of this book is J.K. Rowling's male pseudonym.
Yes, that woman.
I did not know that. That was news to me. But the book seems fairly interesting. So the summary is, when a troubled model falls to her death from a snow-covered Mayfair balcony, it is assumed that she's committed suicide. However, her brother has his doubts and calls in a private investigator, Cormoran Strike, to look into the case. Strike is a war veteran, wounded both physically and psychologically, and his life is in disarray. The case gives him a financial lifeline, but it comes at a personal cost. The more he delves into the young model's complex world, the darker things get, and the closer he gets to the terrible danger. The Cuckoo's Calling is steeped in atmosphere of London, and from the hushed streets of Mayfair to the backstreet pubs to the East End and the bustle of Soho. So it seems very interesting, and it, as you can tell from the explanation, that he's essentially a detective who is also a war veteran, and that's, funny enough, nearly the exact same thing as the old Chrome books that I read. He was a retired military police who then became essentially a private investigator. So that's exactly why this is on my TBR. I love detective books, and I love the premise. I think it's an interesting idea.
Now, I don't know much about why J.K. Rowling decided to use a male pseudonym, but my guess would be is that she wanted to write something very, very different from Harry Potter, which is what she's known for.
That would make sense, because when you get so popular in one atmosphere, as soon as your name is on something, then people might almost be like a little annoyed that it's not another Harry Potter. So it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. It's I always find it interesting when authors decide to use a pseudonym when they're already an established author. I think it's more of like a genre shift.
That would make sense. This seems much more adult themed, obviously, than Harry Potter is. So
yes, because for example, there's the author Rachel Hawkins who writes thrillers, but her pseudonym is Erin Sterling, and Erin Sterling writes witchy rom-coms.
That's quite the difference.
It is quite the difference. I do enjoy her thrillers more than her rom-coms, though. Oops. But speaking of thrillers, I do have a sort of suspense thriller on my TBR, and it is called Let Me Call You Sweetheart by Mary Higgins Clark. Now, you may recognize the name Mary Higgins Clark. She is very, very popular. She is dubbed the Queen of Suspense because her books, let me tell you, are suspenseful. You probably could have guessed.
Yeah, I felt like that one was coming, but.
So Let Me Call You Sweetheart is about Carrie McGrath, and she is a smart, relentless prosecutor. And she takes her daughter to see a plastic surgeon following a car accident when she sees a woman in the waiting room with a beautiful, hauntingly familiar face. On a subsequent visit, she sees the same face again, but on a different woman. Suddenly, she remembers. Both women look startlingly like Suzanne Reardon, the sweetheart murder victim whose husband Skip is now serving a life sentence for that murder. When Carrie starts asking questions, she discovers that just about everyone wants the case kept closed. Still, she persists, but what she doesn't know is that it is already too late. Her puzzled queries have triggered a response, and she is in great growing danger. Dun, dun, dun. So I have become newly acquainted with Mary Higgins Clark over the past year. And this one particularly is on my TBR because I've read 2 other of her books. I've read Pretend You Don't See Her and You Belong to Me, and I absolutely loved them. By the way, there's a cat sitting next to me right now. She jumped up onto our recording table and her wet nose was just all over my fingers. So
She looks like she's ready to start trouble. So
we told you last episode, she's a devious little kitty. So we'll see what she does. Anyway, back to Mary Higgins Clark. She is really, really good at writing red herrings, which, if you are unfamiliar with the term red herring in a thriller book, they are characters that seem suspicious, but you're not really sure if they're suspicious. You kind of have doubts about them, but at the same time, you can kind of justify them not being the perpetrator. So she's really good at writing a lot of suspicious characters. But obviously, there's always only one person that did it. So you kind of got to figure out who done it. And it's fun. I do enjoy reading her books because of that. And she's really good at keeping her readers guessing. I'm always on my toes when I'm reading her books, which is what I love in thrillers. That's why I read thrillers. And I've also been receiving her books from Simon Books, who is currently reprinting them in new paperback versions. And the new paperback versions are super nice. I'm enjoying them. They're like a nice floppy paperback that bends well, so it's easy to hold. They're very lightweight. So thank you, Simon Books, for doing that. And I get them as part of their influencer program. So, you know, in exchange for giving me the book, I would post about it essentially. So that's a nice perk of being a bookstagrammer.
a little bit of a subtle flex there.
You know what? A humble brag. What can I say? But fun fact, this book was originally published in 1955.
That's very interesting to hear. 1955, that seems so long ago, but the concept seems so new, which is interesting.
Right. Well, and that goes to show, like, so my gripe with thrillers is that a lot of authors nowadays, like new current thrillers, they take concepts from older thrillers. So they will take concepts that Agatha Christie has written about, that Mary Higgins Clark has written about, and they'll try and spin it into their own. Obviously, I think Mary Higgins Clark's original concepts of these are better. I enjoy her writing a lot. They're very easy to read. I could read one in a day. And it's not like simple writing either. The stories just move so insanely fast. The pacing is always there. It's always good. And I like them. They're like good, clean thrillers. Nowadays, thrillers try and like throw in like saucy scenes. And I'm like, that's not why I'm reading this, people.
Well, there also seems like there's like kind of a lot of like gore now.
Yes.
And
yeah.
They make it so intense and almost a little gross for the sake of shock value, which I'm not a huge fan of.
They do. And so Karen Slaughter. I like Karen Slaughter. I like her books, but she is very, very gory. So I only recommend Karen Slaughter to certain audiences that I've like screened and been like, do you like gore? And they're like, I don't mind blood. I'm like, okay, great. Then you might like a Karen Slaughter. But if you are a person who's like, no, I like more of like cozy mysteries where we don't get a full description of how the murder was committed, I'm like, well, then you do not want to read a Karen Slaughter book because she's going to be throwing guts in your face.
Yeah, when I started The Good Daughter, it got very intense very quickly. And she's extremely, extremely descriptive on everything.
She is, but it's her books are so good.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed what I had read so far, but the gory scenes are very gory. And sometimes, you know, when the book fits, it fits with that. But I think a lot of the times you have to ride a line of either I'm going to make it gory or I'm going to make it clean. You can't do that back and forth kind of thing.
Right. And Mary Higgins Clark is really good with the clean thrillers, clean suspense, clean mystery. So if you like thrillers, but you don't enjoy details of blood and grossness, her books are probably something you may enjoy. So what's up next on your TBR?
My next one is quite a bit of a long description. So bear with me here.
That's okay. We've got plenty of time.
All right. So the next one is called Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. And a lot of people might recognize that name and the book. He's an extremely big sort of fantasy author. So that's why this is a long description. So let me get into it. For 1,000 years, the ash fell and no flowers bloomed. For 1,000 years, the Ska slaved in misery and lived in fear. For 1,000 years, the Lord Ruler, the sliver of infinity, reigned with absolute power and ultimate terror, divinely invincible. Then, when hope was so long lost that not even its memory remained, a terribly scarred, heartbroken half-Ska rediscovered it in the depths of the Lord Ruler's most hellish prison. Kelsier snapped and found himself in the powers of a Mistborn. A brilliant thief and natural leader, he turned his talents to the ultimate caper, with the Lord Ruler himself as the mark. Kelsier recruited the underworld's elite, the smartest and most trustworthy allomancers, each of whom shares one of his many powers, and all of whom relish a high-stakes challenge. Then, Kelsier reveals his ultimate dream, not just the greatest heist in history, but the downfall of the divine despot. But even with the best criminal crew ever assembled, Kel's plan looks more like an ultimate long shot until luck brings a ragged girl named Vin into his life. Like him, she's a half-Ska orphan, but she's lived a much harsher life. Vin has learned to expect betrayal from everyone she meets. She will have to learn trust if Kel is to help her master powers of which she never dreamed. So why this is on my TBR is because it is a heist. I absolutely love heist. I like the video games surrounding them. I love the movies surrounding them. I just think they're always so fun and cool and action-packed. And I love the idea of building an entire plan and then you have one shot to execute it. Like the whole concept of a heist is so cool. So that's why it's on there.
Like kind of like the Ocean's movies.
Absolutely. I love them. Ocean's 11, Ocean's 13, both incredibly good movies.
I liked the all-female one.
Ocean's 8. Yeah.
That one was good.
That's a good one too. I really like one of my favorite movies of all time is called The Town with Ben Affleck and Jeremy Renner. And it is a heist movie and it's incredibly good. And I love it.
I'm not really a movie watcher.
No, you're not.
But I mean, I say I want to be a movie watcher because you are a movie watcher.
I do. I love movies.
But maybe one day I'll become a movie watcher. I turned you into a reader. You just need to turn me into a movie watcher.
Well, if we actually watch the Marvel movies, like you mentioned, starting with the really good ones in the beginning, I think it can kind of turn you into a movie watcher.
Yes. So for context about that, when we were frolicking around Disneyland, my brain was just like, oh, we should watch all of the Marvel movies in order. It'd be so much fun. And then every weekend when he's like, you want to start watching the Marvel movies? I'm like, no.
Yeah, I know. I keep bringing it up. I'll never forget that you mentioned that. But the early ones are really, really good. They have good writing before they went all Marvel-y and became quippy and not as exciting. Like they started to just become, I don't want to say anything too mean about it because I still watched most of them, but they became more cash grabs as were like the original ones, like the first couple Iron Men and the Thor and Captain America. Those were like good, well-written movies.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of movies these days have just been lackluster.
Yeah, they're struggling with original ideas. Though Barbie was good.
Barbie was good, but I feel like it needed the correct audience because
True.
Most of what they were talking about would probably just go over the average person's head.
Yeah, that's true. I also haven't watched Oppenheimer yet, but I know that was also really, really good.
Wasn't that one also really controversial?
Yeah, they had a lot of explicit scenes that people thought weren't very necessary.
Yeah, that's my gripe with the movie industry, but we're not here to discuss movies. We're here to discuss books.
So, what is the next one on your TBR?
I have Homefront by Kristen Hanna as my final TBR book to chat about today. This one is a historical fiction. Now, you're probably familiar with Kristen Hanna. She's very popular in the historical fiction world. She's written books like The Nightingale, The Great Alone, The Four Winds. And she also wrote Firefly Lane, which is a Netflix series. And I still have not read that one specifically, but I've read her historical fiction ones and I absolutely love them. So this is what Homefront is about. All marriages have a breaking point. All families have wounds. All wars have a cost. Like many couples, Michael and Jolene Zarkades have to face the pressures of everyday life, even as their 12-year marriage is falling apart. Then a deployment sends Jolene deep into harm's way and leaves defense attorney Michael at home, unaccustomed to being a single parent to their 2 girls. As a mother, it agonizes Jolene to leave her family, but as a soldier, she has always understood the true meaning of duty. In her letters home, she paints a rose-colored version of her life on the front lines, shielding her family from the truth. But war will change Jolene in ways that none of them could have foreseen. When tragedy strikes, Michael must face his darkest fear and fight a battle of his own for everything that matters to his family. At once, a profoundly honest look at modern marriage and a dramatic exploration of the toll war takes on an ordinary American family, Homefront is a story of love, loss, heroism, honor, and ultimately, hope. Now, like I said earlier, I love Kristen Hanna. I've read a handful of books by her and I've adored them all. So I am very excited to see what this book is about. It does seem like it leans more into kind of like what The Great Alone did. The Great Alone combined sort of this historical period in time with familial concepts. So The Great Alone was the 1970s in Alaska, but the story wasn't talking about historical events that was happening then. It was just the setting. So this one, I didn't look it up, but I think it's supposed to take place when we had soldiers deployed in Iraq. I think that's what it is. All right, yes, I was correct. It does take place during the early years of the war in Iraq. So this one is doing what The Great Alone did, where it's taking that historical setting, but putting a completely new dramatic story in front of it instead of actually discussing the historical events.
I see what you're saying. This one sounds very interesting.
It does. And I love Kristen Hanna's books because she writes strong female characters. Like you'll notice in this book, it's not the father going off to war. It's the mother going off to war. She's the one being deployed.
Right.
And I love that she does that because then I'm not reading about a man.
I mean, that's fair.
It's just different when you're a girl, you want to read books that have strong female characters.
Right. I think that's fair. I think a lot of the times guys as well also tend to look for a male-led story.
Right. Yeah. And I do also find myself reading a lot of books by female authors as well. I don't know if it's just since I'm a female, I just want to read more female written works, or if it's just my interests, my genres that I'm interested in have predominantly female writers.
Yeah, I think it's probably a mix of both, but it's never a bad thing.
No, I mean, I'm not complaining, but I have made it a goal to read Kristen Hanna's entire backlist. She has a lot of books, so it's going to take me a while, but I'm determined to do it.
How many do you think she has?
Ooh, I actually wrote down all of the books to keep track of her backlist. And I think it's 20 something.
20? I was going to guess over under 10, but.
Yeah, because the cat's just feeling you up right now.
Yeah, I'm getting pawed by the cat over here. Can I help you?
No comment from Miss Peaches. But yeah, she has a lot of books, but she started writing more contemporary fiction, women's fiction type of books, like Firefly Lane, like I mentioned. That one is more your women's fiction, contemporary fiction, talks more about life. And then she sort of transitioned into historical fiction, where she does have some historical fiction books that really dive into the history, like The Nightingale had historical events mentioned. The Women, which is her newest release, talks about the war in Vietnam, which is really interesting. I really loved that one. So she definitely has a wide variety, which is why I want to go through her backlist and see how she's evolved over the years.
Yeah, it seems interesting. I wonder if you could like line up the books to read them in timeline order. You know, like World War II, Vietnam.
I probably could, but I've already read them like all out of order. So
Well, that's true.
unless it's years from now, like when I'm 50 and I want to reread them.
There you go.
All right, when I'm 50 years old, I'm rereading Kristen Hanna's books.
All right. Put it in stone right now.
Wow, that'd be fun. So we have a lot of good books on our TBRs. I'm actually really excited to start reading these. I might have to push them up sooner than when I was planning to read them, even though I had no plan to read these anytime soon. I'm not a planner. I'm 100% a mood reader.
Yeah, you definitely are.
But your books also sound really interesting. So I'm excited for you to read those so we can actually, learn about them.
Yeah, I think I definitely want these to probably be my next 3. I don't know exactly which order yet, but we'll see. They all sound very interesting, and I'm very excited to read all of them.
All right. So what are you reading this week?
This week, I am reading the 4th book in the Witcher series, The Time of Contempt.
And how's that going so far?
It's been good. I'm about 100 pages in, which is only 2 chapters because the chapters are ridiculously long in this book.
Holy moly.
But it's been very good the entire time. The books always follow sort of the same pace of build up, and it sort of reminds you of everything that had happened in the previous books. And I really like that the author goes back to all of the different books, not just the most previous one. It'll reference things from all the way back to the very first one in the series. And it sort of does a really good job of reminding you everything. And I finally hit that tipping point to where now we're in essentially completely unique systems and things that are happening in this book. So I'm very excited to continue reading. It's sort of hit that turning point.
That's good. That's good. So I know The Witcher is also a series on Netflix. Because I mean, we've watched some of the show together. I don't think we've seen, is there a new season out? The latest season that we haven't seen?
I believe there is another season out on Netflix, season 3, and then they're supposedly in the works still for season 4. I'm not sure. But then they also have the video games of the Witcher series, 1, 2, and 3.
Have you noticed things that are different in the books versus the TV show versus the video games?
There's some subtle differences. I actually thought that the TV show, especially the first season, did an amazing job of basically going through the first book. Like they stayed pretty true to all of the happenings. And especially, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but there's a particular action scene, and they did an amazing job of pretty much mimicking it 1-to-1. So I was able to visualize what was happening because I had watched the show before I read the book much easier, and that was really cool. However, I know the game, I did play the 3rd one. I never played the first 2, but the game is more towards the end of the series. But again, they still do a good job of like alluding to the first half or the first books and stuff. So there's definitely a lot of similarities there, especially like the characters are all very similar to what you'd expect them to be, and a lot of the main antagonists are all there. So it's very interesting and it's good. The show, though, especially does a really great job, and that's because Henry Cavill has fought tooth and nail to make sure that they do that appropriately.
I'm getting FOMO by not reading the Witcher books, but I'm scared that I just won't like them.
The pacing is definitely slow for what you would think is like action books, but I don't know. It's like I said, there's the build up in the beginning, and then there's kind of the downhill slope at the end, and that by the time you're on 2/3 of the way through the book, I don't want to put it down.
Interesting. Okay. Maybe I'll read those one day.
put them on the end of the TBR list.
They might just end up at the bottom of the TBR list.
As long as they're on there, I think that counts, right?
I guess so.
What about you? What are you reading this week?
Oh boy. Here we go. I'm reading multiple things. So I'm supposed to be starting the third Percy Jackson book, The Curse of Titans, I believe it is called, if I'm remembering correctly.
I don't remember.
I could be wrong, but it's the third Percy Jackson book for my buddy Reed on Instagram. And I was supposed to have started it a few days ago. But alas, I have overextended myself with buddy reads because I am overambitious. And I'm currently in 2 other buddy reads aside from that one. So I've started reading those other 2 books and sort of putting a pause on Percy Jackson for now because I just basically binged The Lightning Thief and Sea of Monsters. So I feel like my brain just needs a slight break from Greek mythology. So I am reading The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, which is sort of like this gothic Spanish story of this one scullion maid. And it turns out she can grant little miracles. They call them milagritos in the book. And it's really interesting, but, being the time period that it is, sort of that gothic period, I don't know what the actual time period is, but it's a long time ago. It's probably like 1800s-ish in Spain. And everyone thinks anyone who can do magic of any sort is like spawn of the devil because they're a very religious country, very Christian, and anyone who doesn't follow their religion, they basically are not a huge fan of. So I'm very interested to see this girl's story and how that all plays out. So The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, going well so far. And then I am also reading When the Moon Hatched, and that is a Kindle Unlimited book. It is fantasy. It's like, I don't know if I would describe it as high fantasy, but it definitely has a lot of new to me fantasy terms. The author actually included an entire glossary of creatures and names and things to do with the world in the beginning of the book. So it makes me kind of wish that I had the hard copy so I could keep flipping back and forth. Hint, hint.
Oh, I see. I got you now. I love when authors do that, though. It's
I know.
So fun.
I found it to be really cool. Like, I actually sat there and I read through this entire glossary. I didn't just skim it. Like, I know, like, past me would have skimmed the glossary and just jumped into the book.
Right.
But I'm kind of glad that I took the time and I sat and I read the glossary because this is very much more fantasy than I'm used to. But it's a very interesting concept. I don't even know how to describe it. So if you're interested in knowing what When the Moon Hatched is about, just go look it up for yourself because I will do a terrible job at explaining it.
I might have to. It sounds interesting.
It is very interesting. I mean, it's supposed to be the first in a series called the Moonfall series, but a second book has not been announced yet.
I'm starting to realize, though, all the books that I want to add to my TBR are just part of series.
Yeah, it's kind of become the thing I've noticed. I feel like series are more popular now than standalones, which I'm fine with a good series. But if you're like more than 5 books long, oof, I'm probably never going to finish the series.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, the Mistborn series has 2 eras. It's a trilogy in the first era. Then the second era is 4 books. And then supposedly there's supposed to be a new era coming according to the Wikipedia page, but I don't know when that is.
Interesting.
Also, the Gothic period was the 12th and 13th century for Spain, which would have been year 1100 to 1300.
Interesting. I feel like this book doesn't take place like that long ago, though. They do mention, scullion maid is a very old term. They do mention chamber pots.
Chamber pots is a pretty old school thing.
Were they not using chamber pots in the 1800s?
I guess I don't know. I wasn't there.
Well, they also talk about like family houses. Is that like a really old thing?
That's an old kind of concept. Yeah, everyone would essentially live in one building or one house together.
And like, I mean, they do mention like class, like status is very much a thing. I guess they are.
It's kind of like feudalism, could be around that time. And I mean, that lasted for hundreds of years afterwards. So it is possible that it's more to like the 16 to 1800s or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. And you know what? That might be my fault that I don't know, because it could very well say in the synopsis what time period it takes place in, but I just didn't bother to read the synopsis.
I think everyone creates their own sort of headcanon, if you will, with that though. Like whenever
Yeah.
someone describes a place, you sort of picture what you want to picture, and that's how it is.
That's true. But I am enjoying both of my current reads so far, and I'm very excited to keep continuing them. And it's probably going to take me a while to finish When the Moon Hatched, because that is a nearly 700-page book.
Yikes.
Yeah, but it's for another buddy read. Again, The Familiar is a buddy read. When the Moon Hatched is a buddy read. I've overextended myself, I told you.
Yeah, I see that.
But I just couldn't resist. I was going to have FOMO if I didn't join these buddy reads. So I said I'm going to join it because they're books that I wanted to read anyway.
That's fair.
So I figured might as well. Otherwise, I'm never going to get to them.
True. Add them
Yeah.
to the list and just get going on them, I guess.
I guess so. But this was a very fun episode once again. Your TBR sounds interesting. Hopefully, I can get to mine in a timely fashion.
I hope so.
I am very much looking forward to chatting again next week. Next week is going to be chill. We're going to be discussing what we're currently reading, some recent books that we've read that we've loved, and just giving you guys all of the awesome book recommendations. So very much looking forward to that.
Me too.
We will talk to you guys soon, and happy reading.